The morning of my son's wedding arrived wrapped in sunlight and silence, the kind that settles before something sacred begins. I stood alone in my bedroom, smoothing the crease of my suit jacket with hands that had learned patience the hard way. In the mirror, a man stared back at me with silver at his temples and pride in his eyes. Today, my only son would be married. I had imagined this day for years. Not the flowers or the music, those were details, but the moment I would watch him step into a life built on love, steadiness, and trust. Things I had tried to give him since the day his mother passed and left the two of us learning how to breathe again. We hadn't had much back then. I worked long hours, took night shifts, learned to cook meals that didn't come from a box, learned how to listen when he was angry, scared, or quiet. Every sacrifice was made gladly. Watching him grow into a man was my reward, and today, I believed, was the proof that everything had been worth it. The venue shimmered with white roses and soft gold light. Guests smiled, laughed, took photos. Music floated through the air like a promise. When my son greeted me, his eyes shone with happiness I had never seen before. He hugged me tightly. "We did it," he said, voice thick with emotion. "Yes," I replied, holding him a second longer than necessary. "You did." Then there was asterisk or asterisk. She looked flawless, radiant even. Her smile was practiced, elegant, warm enough to charm anyone who didn't look too closely. I had tried from the beginning to welcome her. I told myself that love can wear many faces, and not all of them are familiar at first. She kissed my cheek lightly. "Thank you for everything," she whispered sweetly, as if we shared a private understanding. I nodded. "Take care of my son." "I will," she said, her eyes glittering with something I couldn't quite name. The ceremony began. Guests rose. Music swelled. My son stood at the altar, hands trembling not with fear, but anticipation. I watched from the front row, heart full, chest tight with joy. And then, as the officiant paused and the room fell into a sacred hush, she leaned closer to me as she passed. Her lips brushed my ear. "Buy us a house," she whispered, her voice soft as silk, "or I'll lie and tell everyone I'm pregnant with asterisk your asterisk child." The world didn't stop. The music didn't falter. The guests didn't gasp. But something inside me shattered so quietly, it almost felt unreal. For a heartbeat, I thought I had misheard. For another, I hoped I had. But when I looked at her, the smile on her face didn't reach her eyes. They were cold, calculating, certain. She straightened, walked forward, and took her place beside my son, like nothing had happened. My hands rested calmly in my lap, though my pulse thundered in my ears. Years of discipline, of surviving loss and betrayal, had taught me one invaluable lesson. Asterisk, never react in the moment your enemy expects you to. Asterisk, I inhaled slowly. She had chosen the wrong man to threaten. As the officiant resumed speaking about love and honesty, my fingers slipped into my jacket pocket, not to steady myself, but to touch the edge of something I had carried for weeks, without knowing why, something that would soon change everything. And as I sat there, calm on the outside and unbreakable on the inside, I realized with chilling clarity, this wedding would not end the way anyone expected. I had waited years for the right moment, not for revenge born of rage, but for justice forged with patience. The whisper she had just uttered in my ear, so casual yet so venomous, deserved a response, not one of yelling or confrontation, but of undeniable proof. Something she could not twist, hide, or deny. As the officiant continued speaking, my hand slid deeper into my jacket pocket. My fingers brushed against the smooth edge of a small, sleek device I had prepared weeks ago, a recording of her plotting with her friend, rehearsing the very lie she had just threatened me with. Every word, every cruel intention, captured and sealed. I stood slowly, deliberately. The entire congregation turned their heads in mild surprise. Some assumed it was part of the ceremony. Some wondered if I had simply risen to adjust my tie. But my eyes did not waver. They found hers, cold, calculating, now flickering with the tiniest trace of unease. I held it up. This, I said, my voice calm but cutting through the chatter like a knife, is everything you said you would lie about. Every word you rehearsed, every threat, every attempt to manipulate my family. Her face drained of color, the carefully painted smile faltering. No, she whispered, almost to herself. Yes, I replied, letting the device hum to life in my hand. A clear recording filled the air. The room fell silent as her voice, unmistakable, whispered threats and demands to a friend. The words were hers, the plot laid bare. Gasps echoed around the hall. My son's face went pale as he froze, trying to comprehend the sudden shift in energy. Guests whispered, craning to see the cause of the commotion. And there she stood, frozen in place, realizing for the first time that the calm, collected man she had underestimated was more dangerous than she had ever imagined. I can explain, she stammered, but the room was no longer hers. The moment of control had slipped through her fingers like sand. Explain what? I asked, stepping closer, my voice low, steady. Explain how you thought you could threaten me in my own son's wedding. How you thought lying, scheming, and manipulating could buy you what you wanted. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The recording continued, confirming every lie she had planned. Every guest now understood the gravity of the betrayal. I let the silence stretch just long enough for the weight of the truth to settle. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. Her eyes darted around the room, realizing that her reputation, her grand wedding plan, and her facade of innocence were all collapsing in an instant. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't yell. I simply held the object, a small recorder, the embodiment of patience, foresight, and justice, and let the truth speak for itself. My son stepped back, stunned, and finally turned to me, his eyes wide. Mom, what how? I put the device back in my pocket and looked at him with unwavering calm. I told you, son, always be wary of those who demand what is not theirs, and never let anyone threaten your family with lies. The bride's knees wobbled, and she barely managed to stay standing. For the first time, her mask shattered entirely. The woman who had strutted into my life as a charming bride-to-be was now exposed as a schemer, cornered by her own malice. And at that moment, as whispers rippled through the hall, I knew the wedding would never be the same. She had tried to manipulate the perfect day, but the object in my hand had changed everything, because sometimes the quietest hand hides the sharpest weapon. The silence in the hall was deafening. Guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure whether to intervene or merely watch the unraveling of what they had assumed would be a perfect celebration. The music had stopped, leaving only the faint echo of her voice from the recording, replaying the betrayal for all to hear. She tried to speak, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. I can explain. Her voice trembled, though it was more desperation than remorse. I stepped forward, my voice calm but sharp enough to command the room. There is nothing to explain. You planned this. You rehearsed this. And now everyone here knows exactly who you are. The guests began murmuring, the sound swelling into an uncomfortable roar. My son's face was pale, eyes wide, filled with shock and confusion. He looked at me, as if asking silently, did you know? Yes, son. I said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. I knew enough to protect you and to make sure the truth came out before it was too late. The bride's composure collapsed. She backed up, her heels clicking against the polished floor, eyes darting for an escape. But there was nowhere to hide. Every guest was staring. Every whisper confirmed what she had hoped to conceal. Her scream cut through the air, a high, desperate sound that made heads turn. No, you can't do this, It's not fair. Life isn't fair, I replied quietly, and neither is your manipulation going to succeed. Not today, not ever. My son stepped forward now, the confusion in his eyes giving way to a dawning clarity. How could you?" he asked, voice shaking. "I trusted you, I know," she whimpered, collapsing into a chair, her hands covering her face. I only wanted, no," I said firmly, kneeling slightly to meet her gaze. "You wanted control, you wanted wealth, you wanted to threaten the people who loved you into submission. You didn't love my son. You wanted him as a stepping stone." The officiant approached hesitant, but I shook my head. "This ceremony cannot continue," I said, "not with this lie looming over everyone. The wedding is cancelled." Gasps filled the room. Guests began to stand, murmuring among themselves, some sympathetic, some outraged. Friends and family looked at each other in disbelief. Cameras that had been ready for happy pictures now captured the collapse of a carefully orchestrated deception. The bride tried one last desperate act, reaching for my son's hand. "Wait, we can fix this, please." He recoiled, shaking his head. "No, I see everything now. I can't." His voice broke. He turned away, leaving her hand suspended in the air like a ghost of what might have been. I stepped forward and took her arm gently but firmly. "You need to leave," I said. "You're no longer welcome in this family, or at this wedding." Her eyes filled with tears, but there was no more pleading, only realization. Her schemes, her threats, her carefully constructed lies. All of it had crumbled in a single, decisive moment. Escorted quietly out by staff, she disappeared into the hallway, leaving behind stunned guests and a hall that had known nothing but celebration moments before. My son sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. I sat beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "It's over," I said softly. "Not the way we planned, but the truth is out. And sometimes that's enough." For a long moment we sat in silence. Outside, the sky had begun to darken with clouds, as if reflecting the storm we had just survived. But inside, despite the chaos and heartbreak, there was a strange calm. Justice had been served not with shouting or violence, but with truth, patience, and careful planning. The wedding was never finished. The bride's lies, her greed, and her threats had all been exposed. And in their place, a new understanding had emerged, a bond between father and son, tempered in the fire of betrayal and stronger for it. The chaos of the wedding hall had faded, leaving an eerie stillness that carried the weight of truth. Guests had drifted away slowly, offering awkward condolences, avoiding the bride's scandal, and whispering among themselves about what they had just witnessed. Some shook their heads, others tried to comfort my son, but all knew the day had ended in a way no one would ever forget. I guided my son to a quiet corner of the hall, away from prying eyes. His hands trembled, and for the first time I allowed myself to feel the depth of his pain. He had been blindsided, betrayed not just by the woman he thought he loved, but by the illusion of a perfect life we had all imagined. I can't believe he stammered, unable to finish the sentence. "I know," I said gently, "but now you do, and knowing the truth, painful as it is, gives you power. Never forget that." We sat there in silence for a long time, letting the weight of the moment settle. The wedding was gone, cancelled in the most dramatic way imaginable, but what remained was real: honesty, integrity, and the bond between us. In the following days, the consequences for the bride became clear. Her reputation was shattered, her lies documented and undeniable. Friends who had once supported her distanced themselves. Social media buzzed with the story, though I had no hand in spreading it. Truth had a way of revealing itself. She had wanted power, wealth, and influence, but all she received was exposure and isolation. Meanwhile, my son and I began the slow work of healing. We talked about trust, boundaries, and the lessons that came with betrayal. We laughed quietly about the absurdity of the situation, sometimes shaking our heads at how close it had come to devastating us. We also reflected on the strength it took to remain calm in the face of manipulation, to resist reacting in anger, and to wield patience as a weapon. One evening, as we sat together in the empty living room of my house, my son looked at me with eyes that glimmered with gratitude. "I don't know how you did it," he said softly. I would have panicked, screamed. I would have let her control me. I smiled, placing a hand on his shoulder. The calmest hand carries the sharpest sword. Truth is stronger than lies, and patience is stronger than panic. That's all it took. Life slowly returned to normal. The wedding was a memory, a painful, wild, unforgettable memory, but it became a story of survival, wisdom, and quiet triumph. I no longer felt the sting of betrayal as sharply, because I had seen justice served without losing my dignity. Months later, we gathered quietly for a small, heartfelt celebration. No grand halls, no false smiles, just our family and those who truly loved us. We toasted to resilience, to truth, and to the understanding that some people are meant to enter your life not to stay, but to teach you how to stand taller when they leave. And in that moment, I realized the sweetest revenge is not anger or cruelty. It is calm, measured justice, and the peace that comes after the storm. I looked at my son and knew without doubt that no lie, no threat, and no manipulation could ever touch the bond we shared again. We had survived the betrayal together, stronger and wiser, and in that quiet triumph lay a peace more valuable than any house, any wealth, or any celebration could ever bring. The wedding was canceled, but our hearts were intact, and sometimes that is all the victory you truly need.